This podcast is brought to you by Kyoto Japan Automotive Group, a company which I've known personally for over 20 years, and your one-stop shop for tires, batteries, and auto parts. Visit their website at www.kyotojap.com for more details. Today I'm at Switzerland's École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, known as EPFL, in Lausanne, which ranks these days right up there in the top quartile of great engineering and technical universities in the world, not just in Europe, but in the world. And I'm with Professor Marcel Salathé, who is Joint Director of the EPFL AI Center, and it's one of Switzerland's two highly regarded federal universities. So I'm at the right address to get answers to some of my challenging questions, and yours too. If you're a non-specialist like me, and I've guessed right that the questions in your head about AI are much the same as mine. Hello, Professor Salathé. Thanks for inviting me and listeners to the McKay interview to your office and making time for us. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Welcome, Michael.
Honestly, I was not sure where to start when I prepared for this interview. Please, may I call you Marcel for the conversation? The field of study, whether academically, technically, commercially, seems so vast and fast-moving. But look, here goes. I have many questions. Here's the first one. Though I don't like to start my interviews with a negative, what is it that worries you about current developments and the public understanding of artificial intelligence, or AI? And I promise that I'll come back with a positive question later on.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about on both sides. I would say if I have to pick one on the negative side, it would be the speed issue. So things are happening at an incredible speed. And, you know, a priori, I have nothing against that. The technology is fast. But AI, as I'm sure we'll talk about, is really making its way into pretty much any human activity you can think of. That will have great benefits, but it will also require humans to adjust, especially also if we start talking about things like the job market and so on. But the technology is moving so fast, and I'm not yet sensing that urgency in the population or among the policymakers. It might be related to the fact that the understanding is not quite there yet. I would say that's my number one worry at the moment about this tech.
I see. Okay. Now, I remember as a teenage boy growing up in England in the 1950s and 60s, particularly in the 60s, my father bringing home from work one day a pamphlet from his trade union, which had just one word written on the front cover: automation. He worked in the shoe industry for Clark's Shoes in England. And automation and cheaper shoes from Italy and Spain and then Eastern Europe, nowadays China, Vietnam, undermined that successful British industry. Those countries were able to automate at lower cost than the UK and took the market, especially at the lower price end. To what extent is AI the contemporary automation? Will it really take our jobs?
Well, there's a lot of questions in there. I think maybe let's start with the automation one. So certainly AI is here to automate, but that's been true for any technology development. I mean, basically humans develop technology because they want to make something more energy efficient, or, you know, also do something that you just simply couldn't do before. And that, of course, by the very fact that it's more energy efficient means that it's also more cost efficient if we now sort of project this into our economic ages. And that's in principle a very good thing, right, for the economy, because if our companies cannot automate, then, as you rightly pointed out in your example, someone else will and could really outcompete them. So I'm really actually glad that companies try to be competitive and try to automate. We shouldn't ask them not to automate, because it would essentially be like asking them to die slowly. And that cannot be our interest for the economy. So I would say, you know, there I'm generally quite optimistic about automation and the effects it has. But as you rightly say, what does that mean to our jobs? Certainly some might be replaced. I think that's probably inevitable, though my hope still is that that's actually a small section, that certain tasks are going to be automated, but then jobs just keep onboarding new tasks. And we have seen similar developments with other types of technology. I hope we will see the same ones. You know, there's this famous saying by, I think, a British author who said, program or be programmed. It was meant in the sort of general tech revolution and internet revolution. But I think the thought is the core concept is very much there in that saying. You want to be the one mastering this technology and not either someone else or, in the worst case, even the technology mastering you. So I think we should really be ahead in this game.
Well, the benefit of hindsight now, when I look back on the 1960s, there were huge numbers of jobs which we were inconceivable. We had no idea would exist in the early 1960s that came to the fore in the 1980s and 90s.
That's exactly right. The visual image I usually use is that of an expanding circle. So you have tasks and you get more and more tasks, right, as the economy grows and gets more complex. And automation is basically making its way from the innermost circle of those tasks towards the outside. So it starts eating away at things we used to do 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, but we're constantly moving forward at the edge of the task of this ring, of this circle, where new jobs are being created. And anyone who's done a bit of basic maths knows, of course, that an expanding circle has also a growing circumference, which is why, despite all the predictions that technology will take away our jobs, kind of the opposite has happened, and we're now really struggling to find people for many, many jobs.
Yeah, I can see that. I see that now with the benefit of hindsight. Look, when we chatted before, Marcel, you mentioned this word super hypothesis. What is the super hypothesis? I think you said something about that AI is moving beyond intelligence, but I didn't really understand what you were talking about. What are the implications for us?
So there are kind of three phases of artificial intelligence. The first one is the one we're in now, where we have artificial intelligence that's good at one thing. For example, you can go to a doctor. The doctor may have an AI to help him or her recognize, diagnostic images that you had from an MRI or what have you. That AI is now very good, which is why doctors start to use it, but it's just good at that particular thing. It cannot deal with any other images, let alone any other tasks, right? It cannot play you a piece of music. It cannot have a conversation with you. It cannot drive a car, because it's very specific intelligence. What we're now increasingly seeing, especially also after ChatGPT and these types of so-called foundational AI models, is that these models really start to master things like language or vision. So they become more general and can all of a sudden start to do things more generally. And eventually, the idea is that we get to a stage where the intelligence can do anything we can as well. So that would be artificial general intelligence, or AGI. But the question is, will it stop there, or will it go beyond that? Will the intelligence then help us create intelligence that is even higher than ours? And of course, there's a possibility, and that would be called superintelligence, because it's higher than our own intelligence. And if that is possible, then potentially, right, we're off to the races, because if our level of intelligence allows us to build intelligence that's higher, well, then that intelligence should be able to build intelligence that's even higher, and on it goes. And that could lead to a sort of, runaway process, which some people have concerns we may lose control over. I'm not so pessimistic about that, but that's the implication.
Okay, well, I just want to examine that a little bit more closely, because AI is a force for good in medical science, right? And this is what I hear, and for personal reasons, I think that to be the case. Some medical treatment that I've had recently is thanks to recent developments in AI. But what about, say, in the defense industry, where we could have robot wars, for example, killing soldiers and civilians, or even combat where robots refuse to do what their military masters tell them? Have we set ourselves up for a moral dilemma, or is this just the stuff of science fiction?
So certainly there will be interesting situations. I mean, technology is always a double-sided sword. AI is no different in that regard. And the question is always, what are the potential downsides? Because the upsides, as you mentioned, they're pretty obvious, and medicine is an easy use case because it's quite unlikely that we'll use cancer recognizing AI for bad things, right? That's hard to imagine. But of course, as you say, right, on the other hand, yes, if you can build a technology that can perhaps help you in the defense, well, clearly that can also be used in the offense. I think in general, I don't actually look at this with a lot of dread, because I, for one, would certainly be quite happy with the fact that we outsource all of our physical conflicts to machines. Because frankly, I don't think anyone wants to be involved in a physical conflict. It usually ends bad for most humans. Now we're building machines, like very powerful autonomous drones that have weapons built on them, that have hyper precision. Well, you're going to lose as a human, right? You're going to lose against those machines. So I don't think anyone will send their people in a war against such machines. Rather, they will send their own machines. And as you say, in some sense, that's a bit the stuff of science fiction. But then on the other hand, isn't that also a great human achievement that we've essentially gone beyond fighting each other? We're letting our machines fight each other, and whoever has the better machines and the better engineers wins. I think that could actually be a good outcome, even if that sounds a little strange right now.
I would vote for that. I'd vote for that, of course, yeah. My guest today is Professor Marcel Salathé. He's joint director of the EPFL AI Center in Lausanne, in Switzerland. That's where we are today. And we're talking about the work he does in the field of artificial intelligence. Marcel, is there a geopolitical dimension to this issue that we need to be aware of? When we talked before, you mentioned the CHIP Act. And again, I really wasn't sure if that was an acronym for something. I mean, what's the significance of the CHIP Act?
Yeah, so the CHIP Act is one of those acts that could be important, though it's rather focused really on the US being the world leader on chips. I think one proposed regulation that's actually much more interesting in this context is the so-called AI diffusion rule, that the outgoing Biden administration proposed just literally a few weeks before they left.
And it's a form of regulation.
Yes, it would be a form of regulation. And it essentially put countries into one of three buckets. The good bucket, so to speak, I mean, they called it, of course, differently, where you can essentially buy chips, meaning US chips, right? The chips are largely by US companies. As you want. I mean, no questions asked, essentially, because you're a trustworthy partner. There's the bad bucket that would be, China and other countries as well. But I mean, it really was mostly targeted at China, where you basically cannot buy this stuff. And then there was this middle tier bucket where you can buy under certain circumstances. You certainly always have to ask us, and there are limits. So that's not a great bucket to be in. And surprisingly, Switzerland was in that bucket, along with countries like Singapore and so on. Astonishingly, most countries in Europe were not in that medium bucket. They were in the good bucket. So this caused a lot of concern. Why? Because, well, your future economy is going to heavily use AI. You cannot use AI if you don't have these chips. So this is a real lever now, right, for the US to say, you don't get to buy these chips, or you only get to buy them under certain circumstances. And that really can put economies under a lot of pressure. Thankfully, the Trump administration, just 2 days before this was supposed to go in effect on May 15th, basically shelved the whole thing and said, we'll rethink this. We'll have to do something, but not this. So we'll see what will happen. But it's now a very strong bargaining chip in the geopolitical theater.
And is it as fundamental as that? I mean, what about Taiwan? I thought Taiwan was a major player in this area as well.
So Taiwan is certainly also a major player, but Taiwan is also largely producing chips. The companies that are producing the chips are often US companies like NVIDIA. So if of course, and there's the US government, right, that can tell them how to behave. So if they say, as a US company, right, you cannot sell these chips to Switzerland, then it doesn't really matter whether they're produced in Taiwan or in India or wherever. That's the issue.
Can we just go back one step? Marcel. And again, I just want to be sure I really understand this. Why has there been progress in AI so fast, so rapid? That's what I really am trying to grasp. Is it to do with the volume of engineers, the amount of money that's put into these projects?
Yeah, so I think...
Or has it been going on, but just the ordinary man in the street didn't notice it?
That's right.
People like you did.
That's one aspect. So I think there's at least three aspects. One is the one that you just mentioned. In fact, right, this development hasn't happened overnight. It's a bit of an exponential development in the sense that it keeps going faster and faster. But, by and large, the rate of acceleration is still the same. So it's like, during the COVID pandemic, right? The early COVID numbers were rising exponentially. It didn't look like much, 2 today and 4 tomorrow and 8 the day after. But then, of course, very quickly, we were looking at thousands and millions because of certain doublings. And it's similar here. So if you look at this, in the past 10 years, you can really see this exponential progress. And so if you only look at this now post ChatGPT, of course, it feels like this came out of nowhere, but it really hasn't. That's one thing. The other thing is that technology helps us develop better technology. And this is, I think, really the root cause why technology development is fundamentally exponential. And I don't think, this is going to slow down significantly anytime soon. And the third aspect is the internet. I mean, currently at least, we're largely still talking about software. We can talk about robots, but mostly, right, we're talking about things like ChatGPT and so on. This is software. And of course, the internet, which is now widespread, means that you can build such a technology, and it's not going to take years or decades to get into the homes of people. It can literally happen overnight. And this is exactly what happened with ChatGPT and is now happening with all of the other AI tools as well.
I see. Well, it's really fascinating to hear you explain it the way you do. I want to ask you a completely different kind of question now. You told me that you've got young children. I've got young grandchildren as well. And I'm curious to know your opinion on how best to use AI to educate our children, the youngsters. Today's youngsters, my grandchildren, are growing up with ChatGPT. We talked about it, and another one that I just recently learned about called Perplexity. My wife and I bought Commodore 64 for our kids in the 1980s. That was then the modern thing to do as parents. I may do a school with logarithm tables and a slide rule in the 60s. Now, the pace of change, as we've just been discussing, is frightening. And regarding the use of AI, what do you think, Marcel, is the wise thing for parents and grandparents and teachers to do for today's younger generation? And how do you, as a university professor at another level, use AI to allow your students to use it?
Yeah. So, I mean, for kids, I would say my advice is relatively simple, which is to relax.
Really?
Simply because I think there's so many foundational capacities that you need to learn as a child, right? Of like being in the world and interacting with humans, which will just not get old, right? No matter what technology we have.
What they used to call teamwork in old-fashioned English.
For example, right? Yeah. There's one example, but there's many such examples. We actually never really speak about this because it's sort of taken for granted.
Social skills. Yeah.
But actually, right, when you try to do AI when you try to have AI play certain roles, you very quickly realize, oh, that's actually not possible because the thing doesn't know, right, how to behave in the world. So
have you done that?
So there's certainly studies, right, that show that time and time again. But I would say there, right, don't drive yourself crazy. I had to chuckle a bit when you said Commodore, because when I was a kid, I wanted such a machine so badly, right? Or it was an Atari, it was, sort of that time. And I wanted it mostly to make music. Yes. But my parents were relatively strict when it came to technology. So basically, right, it was like no computer in this house. Like when you're an adult, right, you can do what you want. So I had my first computer at the age of 18. And I would say I haven't done so badly when it comes to technology. No, so certainly I think, right, even if the kids don't have access to this stuff right now, they'll pick it up immediately. Indeed, we're seeing some counter movement to all of this, right? Where we say, oh, the screens and so on, it's too much for the kids. It inhibits them from social learning. And there's movements to get these screens out of the school. And I'm by and large, I am supportive of those movements because I do think it's trivial to pick up screen skills when you're 18. And so, why, or it could even be 16, why sort of, in quotes, spoil a childhood with that? So there, I would say relax and, the kids will be fine. Now, of course, when they are 18 or when they come to university, it's a different game. I mean, then we need to prepare them for the real world of technology, and they need to learn how to use those tools very effectively. There's not really any point, like let's say you have a 12-year-old, I don't think there's really any point to teach them that now. If they're naturally curious and they want to, that's totally fine, but certainly don't force them upon them, because when they're 18, the technology will have changed radically. Anyways, they will have to relearn. So just let them be kids for a little longer and they'll do fine. I'm pretty certain about that.
I agree with you. And in my own family, I think we have this similar philosophy amongst my own children. Going back another step, we talked about the Chinese, maybe a little bit unfairly, but I have to ask you this question because it is such a significant one geopolitically. Should we fear Chinese advances in engineering? I stress that, engineering and the use of AI. I mean, numerically speaking, they have so many more engineers compared with Europe and the USA, and I hear that they're all very good.
Yeah, so I mean, we shouldn't fear them, but we should certainly respect that development, and that's a development that's been going on for some time. If you, for example, look at published papers, in scientific journals, good scientific journals from China, the US, or Europe, actually China has taken over some time ago.
And these are peer-reviewed journals.
Yes, so already today, right, if there's a scientific superpower, and especially one where the curve is still going up, it's China. And I think that notion hasn't really arrived for like people in Europe and the US. Some, yes, but it's still, when we think of China, we still sort of have these pictures of these poor farmers and some crazy modern cities, but I think the notion that really, no, there's a whole country, right, of a lot of people that is getting ready for this technology wave, that is something I think to don't want to say replicate, but really to take seriously. We don't want to replicate it because we think, right, in the West, the Chinese model is not ours, right? We're much more, we're inclusive. We have participatory politics, or at least we used to have. I mean, the direction is a bit strange at the moment, but we still live in democracies. But still, I mean, this idea that we should take technology and engineering and science much more seriously, I'm missing that. I mean, I remember, not personally, but reading about it, after the Sputnik moment, when I think it was President Eisenhower had these speeches about, really getting much more serious about science and engineering in schools. And a lot of has happened since then. And we're just not seeing that today. There is no movement, as far as I'm aware, in the US or in Europe on a larger scale that says, we really need to get more serious about training engineers and scientists. At the moment, we still talk about these developments mostly in the negative. It's the tech bros, right? It's mostly used in the negative. And we rarely speak about scientists and engineers in the very positive, and that we would like to have more of them. It's clear not everybody needs to be a scientist or an engineer, but the skills, the understanding, and the appetite for that, I think, should be much more widespread, because it will really influence the wealth that we have in these countries.
Fascinating point of view. For those of you, for the young ones listening, Sputnik was around 1956. It was a satellite, and the Russians beat the Americans to it, much to the chagrin of the Americans at the time. Let's come closer to home, Marcel, the Swiss. You said to me earlier that you're from Basel. The Swiss can be quite ponderous and thorough and long-winded in their project planning and preparation, which is a good thing. It builds consensus, which is very important. It's a national and a worthy characteristic. But is that quality of any use in the field of artificial intelligence development?
I would say yes and no. I mean, if you're in a sort of situation where you just rapidly need to build something, especially in software, and you just need to go, and go fast and go big. That's not the Swiss approach, right? And that's why there are no like foundational AI companies in this country. The Swiss are relatively fast, but they observe first, right? As you aptly put, they come to a consensus. What is the best way? They think about the options, and then they double down, and then they do it right. So Swiss are often number two, but at an extremely high quality. And so even the fast-moving companies actually really appreciate that, and they often then come to Switzerland and establish, large aspects about their engineering activities here in Switzerland. The other thing I would say is software is one thing, and we've been living in the software revolution these past 10, 15, 20 years. I think a much bigger revolution that's just around the corner is really robotics, right? Bringing this technology now into the physical world, drones, robots, what have you. And there it's about building actual hardware. And there you cannot just fail fast, right? And there, if you look at the US, for example, how long it takes them to build a bridge or a mile of road, and you compare that to Europe or Switzerland.
And the British have a bad reputation in infrastructure. Yeah,
I think there's definitely a lot of a lot of diversity, but the Swiss are actually doing pretty well, right? We're building these tunnels, we're building them on budget, we're building them on time, and we also have this here we have this history of fine mechanics, also because of the watches, and that stuff is really good, and that's the kind of stuff you need if you start to build robots that will also have to last, right, in the physical reality of nature. You can't just sort of make it till you break it, because that thing will break way before. And that's an asset that will, I think, help the Swiss a lot. So I'm quite optimistic. Switzerland is already a powerhouse when it comes to engineering and technology. Of course, we're a small country, but I think we will be even more so as we enter the age of robotics.
That's very encouraging. So as the pendulum is swinging upwards, let's finish on an even more positive note. Let me ask you this final question, Marcel. What gives you joy as a professor and a sense of professional satisfaction in your field of expertise?
Yeah, there's so many things. I mean, of course, as an educator, right, as everyone who's somehow attached to education in one way or another knows, right, there's nothing more satisfying than seeing people you've educated go out into the world and do well. And so, of course, at EPFL, right, I'm predestined to be proud of the people who come here, because they're all fantastic. And I think especially now there is a crop of students that is just also so mature. I'm really surprised. I mean, I was so immature as a student, and I mean, I think I eventually did well, but we were up to a lot of mischief, and now the students, if I see them, they're so organized. They know what they want. They're starting projects. They're executing. I'm super impressed. I always tell them, don't work hard is good, but don't forget to also party and have a life. But I'm very optimistic there about that. In terms of other professional joy, I'm now at a stage of my career where I'm not that young anymore, so I don't have to prove my worth anymore. Rather, I can take a lot of joy just helping others succeed, especially also the younger ones. And there, I'm really now in a privileged position here at the AI Center, because I get to work and talk to a lot of faculty who are doing fantastic work. That I wasn't even fully aware existed, right? Just 2 buildings down. They're actually inventing the future. At the moment, I'm super excited about what's happening at this brain AI interface, where people like Grégoire Courtine and others are building, right, AI bridges to help paraplegics walk again. I mean, this was the stuff of utopia just a few years ago, and now it's actually successful. And it's just incredible to be here and watch that and see, right, where I can help opening doors. I think one thing that I will do much more, as I'm also now publishing a book soon on AI, actually in German and in French, is really going out and being more of a connection also to people out there, right, as we talked about. I mean, I had my fair share of that during the COVID pandemic. Not all of it was positive, of course. It was a pretty crazy time for everyone. But still, to this day, I'm sometimes getting messages where people tell me, "Oh, I saw you on the train. I just want to tell you, we really appreciated the information you shared in the media, my entire family." And this really makes your week, right? Because then you realize, okay, what you're actually saying and what you're communicating does have an impact. And now that I'm seeing this AI wave coming, I mean, it's not a pandemic. I think it can be much, much more productive. But I still want to go out there and tell people, okay, this is coming, and here's how it works, and here's how you can use it, to make your lives better. If you want to, of course, at the end, it's you. But that also gives me a lot of satisfaction.
I can't think of a better way to end our conversation, Marcel. It was fascinating just listening to you. And I thank you for being so open and explaining things in simple language to me as a layman. My guest today has been Professor Marcel Salathé. He's Joint Director of the EPFL AI Center in Lausanne. Thanks again, Marcel.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks for listening to the McKay Interview podcast, brought to you by Kyoto Japan Automotive Group, a company which I've known personally for over 20 years, and your one-stop shop for tyres, batteries and auto parts. Visit their website at www.kyotojap.com for more details. And you can find more podcasts on Anchor FM. Just Google McKay Interview Anchor FM. Thanks again for listening.